Easter Uprising began in 1916 on Easter Monday, the 24th of April, and lasted for 6 days. These freedom fighters were vastly outnumbered and outgunned by the British Army, but this short rebellion changed the Irish political landscape forever. The leaders of the rebellion were swiftly rounded up and brought to this prison, where they sat in front of a military court and were sentenced to death. James Connolly, who was injured and unable to stand, was executed while tied to a chair. When I read the Old Testament, I read many stories of violence, and it isn't very pretty. Mark, if God is a God of love, how come there's so much violence in the Bible?
You know, when the Irish uprising took place, the longing of the hearts was for freedom. The longing of the hearts of those individuals were to have a land where there would be peace. If you look at the government of God, there was an uprising there too. But that uprising was against a righteous ruler, God. And so down through the centuries, there has been a conflict, there has been war. And the Bible is an accurate record of what's happened in that conflict between good and evil. The reason you read violence in the Bible is because violence actually happened. Now, the question becomes, why does God allow violence? And the question becomes, why doesn't God do something about that violence? Why does God, for example, command armies to go and attack other armies? If you look at the history of the Old Testament, God only commanded Israel to attack other armies that he had already warned, that he already had reached out his hand to save, and that were going to attack Israel. Had God not caused Israel to attack these other nations like the Amorites, the Amalekites, the Moabites, they would have attacked Israel and stamped out righteousness. So at times, if you have a cancer, for example, you have a knife, the surgeon has a knife, he has an operation to cut that cancer out. And so the cancer of sin must be dealt with by God at that period of time. So to protect righteousness, to protect the human race, God at times used ancient Israel to stamp out evil so that he would keep evil from spreading.
But why did God help people to kill other people? For example, did God not help David to kill Goliath?
In that instance, Goliath and all of the hosts of the Philistines were getting ready to attack Israel. Had God not sent David to kill Goliath, Goliath and Philistines would have killed many, many more Israelites. So God at times uses what we call a surgical precision. He uses righteousness to cut out evil, to protect life, not to take life.
Okay, but I can understand partially that armies fighting against armies, but why were women and children being attacked as well? Why would God allow that to happen?
The reason why God allows that to happen is because I think there are two reasons. Number one, the armies, say the Amalekites and Moabites, were part of an entire culture that had become so evil, generation after generation after generation after generation. And there's something in physiology called the law of fifth generation, where if you have deterioration in generation after generation after generation, you can actually lose the capacity to respond to positive choices and righteousness. So I think something that we may not fully understand happened in those societies. A second thing is involved is this. Had God brought many of those women and some of those children into Israel, it would have been very possible, because of their predisposition and the culture that they've been brought up in, to really change the entire composition of Israel. So God in mercy, God in love, reaches out, does everything he can to save, everything he can to redeem. But when entire corporate nations reject him and God sees that they have gone beyond that love, he allows Israel to destroy them like destroying evil. And I think you see the same thing in the time of the flood. At the time of the flood, the Bible says in Genesis 6 verse 5, the hearts of men and women were only wicked continually. Why did God allow a flood to destroy men, women, and children? Because he gave them a chance through Noah, but it was the only thing he could to preserve righteousness in the human race.
But in the Bible, the Ten Commandments, it says do not murder. Do the Ten Commandments not matter sometimes, or?
Sure. God says, for example, in the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And what is the essence of that commandment? Respect human life. Respect human life. And so God calls us constantly to respect human life. And when you look at the nature of God, God did respect human life himself. He does everything he can to redeem, everything he can to save. There are instances, for example, what if we're standing there, a man comes along with a knife and he's going to stab my throat? Would you try to protect me?
Of course.
And so that's what God was doing. There are times that certainly God was trying to protect, and in that protective act of God, other lives were taken. And so, yes, God says, thou shalt not murder. What is he saying? Respect human life, protect human life. And God calls us to do that. And he did that throughout the scriptures.
Okay, Mark, in the Bible, so God allowed people to kill other people. So today we are living in an anti-Christian society. Should Christians be starting a new Easter uprising?
You know, when you look at what happened, say, in the Bible in the Old Testament, first you come at it from the perspective, both in the Old and New Testament, God has revealed his love. He's revealed his gracious and kind. When you look at Israel, it's what we call a theocracy. God himself directed the nation of Israel. An all-wise, all-knowing, all-intelligent God knew the consequences if he allowed this civilization to exist. He knew that they would attack Israel, they would attack righteousness and destroy it. Today, we are not guided in a theocracy by God. We have governments that mandate laws in society, just and righteous laws. So the answer to your question is no, Christians should not uprise, Christians should not rebel. When you come to the New Testament, after Israel ceases to be God's chosen nation, you see Jesus saying, if somebody asks you to go 1 mile, go 2. If they slap you on one cheek, turn your cheek. We're no longer living under that theocracy of God. And it's difficult for us, from a 21st century perspective, to look back at what was going on in the Old Testament and reconstruct that. That's a very difficult thing to do. And so today, we look at the great principles, the respect of life, human dignity, and we look at love, which is the total respect. That took place in the Old Testament, but it was only God that was determining what was going on through his nations then.